Great, thank you. All right, well, thank all of you for coming out. I appreciate it. We're going to take the next few minutes, probably about 30, maybe 40 minutes, to talk about an item that is kind of important to us here at New Era Software about helping you identify and protect your most critical ZOS datasets and files. The basic concept here is not all datasets and files are created equal. Some are more important than others. Some require additional levels of protection, analysis, monitoring, if you will, to keep track of what's happening against those more critical data sets and files. And that's what we're going to be touching on here this afternoon. This is meant to be an introductory kind of webcast to explain it. There's more detail available in follow-on webcasts, or if you go out to our YouTube channel, there's some additional YouTube videos out there to take a look at and learn more about any one of the subjects that I'm going to talk about here today. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with New Era Software and what we do, basically, we're out here to help the ZOS professionals maintain the highest level of integrity and readiness for their ZOS environment. We provide products and services that help you do that, that help you monitor that integrity, protect it, and continually evaluate the definitions and the controls that are put in place against that environment to make sure that it is at the highest level of integrity and readiness for all of your LPARs and across your entire sysplex and all your subsystems. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, one of the things we like to do is help you establish, maintain, and monitor your best practices. There are some very basic things in here that I'm sure you're well aware of and you're taking care of. Things like always make a backup before you make a change to something important. Do your testing. Make sure that whatever changes you're making fit properly into where it's going to be used and within the overall structure where it's going to be executed or called upon or whatever it's going to do. Hopefully you're maintaining an inventory of the different versions of your changes. Sometimes this gets a little complicated because you have to have naming structures so that you know that number 9 is a backup of number 8 and so on, that kind of strategy to keep the different versions around. There's also a lot of other things about being able to compare those versions, being able to restore back to one of those versions, and make sure that the changes that are being made and versions being created were indeed authorized and they weren't unexpected or unauthorized, and to monitor these configurations over time, again, for their operational integrity and their readiness so that they can be used at any point in time. Now, what we do is try to automate all of this, to put in tools and products and services that help you do these things automatically. So it's not a manual task to create a backup. It's not a manual task to test it, but we give you the ability to use our tools, Image Focus, Control Editor, to be able to do these things to enforce and establish these best practices. The standalone environment product, looking at the list of attendees, some of you have that. That was how we started our company decades ago, and it has the ability to provide a single-use, single-user approach to doing system repairs without an operating system being up. It's still widely used, and a lot of people kind of keep it in their desk drawer in case they ever have a problem. They can bring up this little standalone utility and be able to fix and repair anything that might be broken to get the LPAR or the sysplex back up and operational. So that's what we're kind of about. And what we're doing now is trying to change the focus of these tools and services to help you understand that what they can be used for is a policy decision point. That is to make sure that people who are making improvements and changes to your data sets and files, that they're doing that correctly, that they have the authority to do so, that the changes that they're making will not impact the availability or the integrity of the environments. And so that's what these products are evolved to and help our customers establish, along with their best practices. Now, we do that by establishing something we call control boundaries. These boundaries have to deal with things like parmlib and proclibs and load libraries and commands and things like that. We want to organize and put different services around the different types of data sets. So my parmlib needs one set of controls. My JCL library needs a little bit more relaxed controls. But be able to establish these different boundaries by type of resource and then to enforce and monitor capture and journalize all the activity against those different boundaries so that we know what's going on. Now, these boundaries are data sets. These are PDS, PDSEs, sequential data sets. These are Unix files. They're load libraries, the issuance of commands and messages that go across the system. We can even help you track user activity when a user logs onto the system or or changes their password, and be able to track that and notify the user that that user ID was just used. So if it was done off hours and it wasn't them, they know their credentials had been borrowed or compromised in some way, and they can take appropriate action. So all of these boundaries can be established within our product's structure to help you establish those best practices that I mentioned by, again, monitoring, capturing, journalizing, and enforcing access against those different boundaries. Now, what we do is we write all of our records into a journaling system. These store away the history or the versions of the different changes if it's an edit, or the execution of a command if it's a command, or a record of a logon attempt, or whatever the event was that we want to record. We put this away into the journaling system. Now, traditionally, again, for those of you who are customers out there, you know that our products have been administered through a series of panels built in our own VTAM application. So this is, you'd log onto our VTAM app, you'd go through a series of panels to get through all the data, all the administration functions, and to generate all the reports and information available from the data captured and stored into the journals. And that's still true today. It's still there. It's very functional. It has a great amount of flexibility and detail that can be extracted out of those journal records and provide the information to you. That information can be sliced in a lot of different ways. You can look at it by everything from which category, in other words, how many times was ParmLive changed, to how many edits were done across all the entire universe, or how many events were done by a certain user or a group of user IDs, and our versionings, and again, execution of commands and all the other activity. All of this data can be sortable, selectable, and can be queried against, either using that structure, or now on the right-hand side, you see something that might be new to you. This is simply called My Applications. There's a series of them. There's one for the control editor. There's one for the batch execution and the batch logs produced from the various products. There's one for the control for image focus itself. There's another one for just the IP environment. There's a whole series of new applications coming. The benefit of these is it brings that data extraction out of the journals into a TSO ISPF environment, so that you need not go through the panel structure that I mentioned in our application in order to get the results. It brings the results to the top of the pyramid so that you can view them very quickly and very easily directly from TSO ISPF. There's separate webcasts for those new applications, as well as, again, on our YouTube channel, there's videos out there that you can watch talking about what we're building and how that will be established and created for you. But right now, what I want to do is kind of show you what I'm talking about here. Instead of talking conceptually through these slides, is actually give you live examples. So what I want to do now is go over to our VTAM application. Because when we talk about critical data sets and files and trying to protect them, one of the first things we need to do is understand, are they complete? Are they correct? Are they trustworthy? Will they do what they're expected to do? And this is true from a JCL member all the way up to a ParmLive member that creates all your mount points for BPX-PRM, or your controls for your TCP/IP environment. So what we have in one of our products is a process we simply call an inspection. An inspection looks at a configuration of, in this example, I'm going to go through the IPL process and talk about how we can process that IPL logically in order to determine if all of those critical files and data sets that would be used at IPL time are correct and complete, and that they all assemble properly within the structure that I'm trying to use those for. Now, we can do it at a very high level to start with. We can start with the sysplex analysis, and what this simply does, it looks at all of the LPARs available within a sysplex. And again, this could be the running system, it could be a non-running system, it could be a system that's never been IPL'd before, or however you want to configure this. But the idea is to analyze the statements within the data sets and files that build this particular sysplex and determine whether or not there's any issues or problems in the construction of the sysplex. So we're at a very high level here, and we're looking at the sysplex configuration, and it will go through each of the individual LPARs that have been defined to it or discovered automatically if they're executing. And we'll go down and say, these are all the components I found. This is where they are. They all look good. They all fit together. And yes, these LPARs will be candidates and will connect properly within the sysplex. So that's good news. My sysplex will configure properly and everything will work. But now I need to look at each individual LPAR and see if each LPAR also will be correct. We know it will plug into the sysplex correctly, and so all of the sysplex definitions that are contained in ParmLab, such as GRS and SMF and things, all of those are correct. But are there any other issues? And you can see in this example, I'm looking at System D, and it has come back and tell me during the course of its inspection, it discovered something that was wrong. It discovered an error. So I can come back in and ask the question of, what did you find? What was my concern about this particular LPAR if I tried to IPL it? Now, in this case, it is a running LPAR, but I'm looking at the definitions for this LPAR within ParmLab, which may or may not be the same as what's executing, and we'll talk more about that as we get into this. But what it's saying is I've got some problems. I've got an error in the operating system area, and I've got an error in JES2 and a couple other things. And this is simply going to report this to me and show me what it liked or didn't like or whatever it found as a result of the inspection. Now, what's nice about this is that when it tells us that it found something, it points us directly to what we need to research or fix or correct or deal with in some way. And our alerts come out on 3 different levels. There's certainly errors. These are more catastrophic in nature. There's warnings, which are just things we should be concerned with that may cause a loss of service or capability later. And then there's notices. Again, these are things that are kind of low-level concerns, but they're out there and you should take a look at them and see, measure the impact for yourself in order to it's something we should deal with. So when we're dealing with these critical data sets and that, in this example, looking at the IPL, we can think of the data sets really as 3 different types. There's what we call directors. These are members and data sets that build things for us, that give us information to be used as we process down through, and they need different levels of protection than some of the other data sets. So for example, here I'm looking at this prog member that says there's a warning in it, and if I select that, it takes me directly to where that report exists for that particular member. It's given me a warning saying I don't have RACF protection set for this the way I should, and this is my test system, and we have lots of these issues. We really don't protect the test system as well as perhaps we should. But as it goes through its inspection, it's checking syntactically whether or not this member is constructed properly. But it's also looking at the member from a standpoint of referential integrity. So if there's something wrong where a data set is missing, it's going to tell me that. But it also builds a profile for this particular director. It's building, in this case, a list of APF entries or linked list entries or LPA entries, and it's going to tell me what it's going to look like when I get finished. It'll give me the inventory, which data sets are being part of that particular target, and what are the characteristics of that. So you can see here that in my case, I'm going to have plenty of extents left over, which is good, but in a production environment, maybe I'm pushing that 255 limit. It's also going to tell me if I have data sets that are in extents or in secondary allocations, things that I may want to deal with, things that I don't want in my environment for performance or other reasons that I don't want this to exist. This monitors it and builds that profile for you. At the same time, it checks the syntax and the referential integrity of these statements. So these are our directors, and they're going to tell us about the different members within the ParmLab dataset concatenation. Certainly ParmLab concatenation is one of those critical data sets we need to worry about and protect. You can see as we go through all of the members within the IPL, it's going to process them all and tell me again if any has issues or problems or which ones are correct and fully usable. They all get the same level of analysis. But if we move on to another type of data set that's important for this process, in this case again looking at the IPL process, we have looked at the subsystems. So we looked at JES and VTAM and TCP/IP. So we've got a warning in TCP/IP, and then we looked at data and telnet and profile and all the other components. And some of those are directors, but we also have another type of data set in here you can think of more as protectors. These are ones that establish rights or controls over access to the application that's being defined. So it's RACF or ACF2 or top secret for the operating system environment and all the data sets. But in the case of TCP/IP, it has its own policy agent in this thing called Pageant. And so we want to be able to analyze that as well for its correctness and its integrity. And we can inspect that. It's an optional inspection that we can turn on, as is JES and VTAM and all the others. We can use the reporting either, let's look at the summary of this first. And so this is going to give me the overall view of what it inspected. This is the results. I've got some errors, I've got some warnings, and notices it looked at all the different capabilities. It can include the daemons in this if we choose to. But what I want to do is look and see what it found in terms of errors. So I can ask it to find that for me by doing this. There's a couple different ways of doing it, but you can see it found that that file was not found. So much like we saw with the example in a ParmLab member where the entry in a prog member didn't exist, we would get a warning similar to this saying that data set can't be found. In this case, we're telling you inside this deck we have the same problem. We can come down and also look at perhaps lower level concerns, warnings. And so here's warnings that come out where I have conflicting statements. So what we're doing is now looking at these protector files as well. And again, checking the syntax, checking the referential integrity, checking whether or not they will work properly within the structure for which they're intended to be used. So we're getting an overview of these most critical files and data sets to see whether or not they're correct before we even begin to worry about them and protect them. Now the next level of data set we need to worry about are executables. So we want to look at the load libraries. And in this case, we're going to look at a load library list that's automatically generated, which would be linked list or LPA or APF. But you can extend that and build your own list of load libraries that you want to look for. So we can look at it and say, well, in this case, in this simple system, my linked list concatenation has over 3,000 redundant or duplicate load modules within the linked list concatenation. Not going to cause a problem necessarily at IPL time, but it might cause some confusion and concern later on if you're putting on maintenance and you're putting it in the wrong place. It also looks for types of problems. So here we have a situation where, again, in my linked list, I have some orphaned aliases. These orphans are done by different reasons. These are done by size. They don't hook up right. Some might be done by TTR, as in the case here by, this is again a size and LPA list, and give you an overview of concerns or risk within the load library concatenations. But we want to go on beyond that. We want to be able to say, has everything worked together? When you put these three data sets together, is everything proper? So if I go back and look at the full inspection log that was produced and find an example, so let me do an example here where I'm looking for the startup of a CICS region. And it will say, okay, here I see the start command. It's going to be started under JES 2. And then we're going to go down and find here now in JES 2 inspection, it's telling me the JCL is being processed and the JCL all looks good, everything looks fine. If there was a problem with the structure of the JCL, it would tell me that. But the idea is that this is also being inspected. But the question is, will it start correctly? So we're going to take a look at another evaluation that's done. And what this is telling me is that we've got a little bit of a problem in the fact when this CICS address space starts, there are some data sets that are APF authorized and some are not, which exposes this to the possibility of an abend at startup time and system 047. And so what we're doing now is putting the pieces together. The directors, the JCL that says this is what you need, the load libraries that are going to be executed by it, and we can also see the RACF messages that says these data sets aren't protected if that's the case. But when you put all this together, we still have a problem because they're all not being resolved or defined in a same proper fashion. So what we need to know is where this came from. Where, is this a problem? Do I need to deal with it? And do I need to address a change? Do I need to make an improvement to that? And so the next part of monitoring these critical data sets and files is to see if they have indeed been changed or altered. And we do that through a facility, again, within the same product, where we're monitoring this over time. So we're setting up interval processes where we're going to go off and inspect the different targets, do the same inspection that you saw here. It can be done, as I showed you, in what we call the workbench view, which is an interactive method of executing the inspection. The inspection can be run on an interval timer that we provide that will give you the analysis, as well as, you'll see here in a moment, the changes that it evaluated. It can also be run in batch mode, or a lot of these can also be run inside the health checker for ZigOS from IBM. So you've got multiple ways that you can run these inspections, but they all generate out the same level of analysis and the same level of detail. So in this case, going back to System D, I want to look at the history of changes that have been detected by System D and on System D and see if there's something I need to deal with. And I can come back and ask for a report from a given time, and the report will show me what has changed for System D. The full report is here, the same log that we saw before from this execution back on April 15th. But on the 15th, it detected there was a change between the prior version that was stored, and that change is detailed here. I've got a summary of it. Someone made a change to what's called Cust1, which is a custom inspector that we can extend these into our own data sets, our own processes, so that we can include those in the inspection process. And then the detail of the change itself is displayed here. And you can see that someone actually went and edited that custom inspector target and put a new line in it. We can see who did it and when and how. All that information is available to us, as well as the analysis of its current state. So if the change had been made to change, let's say, the PROG member, that change would have been evaluated by this process. So it's a continuous monitor that runs whenever you choose it to against any possible structure and tells you whether or not it's been altered, and at the same time evaluates that change. Now, when we talk about change, we have to also think about it from a standpoint of what can change dynamically. So you have, looking at the ParmLive data sets and members and all the files and everything gets processed through. And it's going to go off and tell you that everything is fine, or this needs to be looked at, or this needs to be repaired, or whatever. But it's looking at the configuration, if you want to think of it simply, at rest. Those are the contents of the members in the data sets that it read when it did its inspection. Not necessarily what was executing. And I made that point earlier, and now I'm back to it. What we do for that is we perform something we simply call a dynamic audit. And what the dynamic audit will rerun the inspection, reading the values that are in the data sets and files and members, and then compare that back to the actual running system in order to determine whether or not there's a balance that exists between what's defined and what's actually executing. So you can think about, if I make a modification with a command to do something, that's kind of in flight. I'm making the change dynamically. I have to make sure I harden that back into ParmLive, into my data set, so that the next IPL, that change is picked up and incorporated. If I fail to do that, if I take an IPL, I lose that modification that I made dynamically, obviously. And this is the kind of audit capability we give you in order to look for that scenario and determine whether or not your configuration is reliable. Is it complete? Will it give you back the results that you expect? So all of this so far has been looking at the configuration files that are part of the IPL, but they can be expanded, as I said before, with the custom inspectors. And you can think about the logic that we apply here in terms of making sure that they're correct, complete, can apply to a larger generation of data sets and load libraries and even files. Now, the way we know about these changes, because changes are required. They're always making improvements, putting up new versions of software, putting on new services for different customers. Whatever we need to do, we need to make changes and maintain that environment. It's not going to be frozen forever. So what we do is we have another application simply called the control editor. The control editor, as its name indicates, gives you the ability to understand when changes are being made to the configuration. Going back to my boundaries on the slides, we're talking about someone makes an edit to a critical data set or file, or a load library, or a Unix file, or whatever they may be doing. We want to be able to record that. We want to be able to measure the effect of that. We want to be able to notify people that these things are going on. So we have email notifications coming out in a lot of different places whenever changes are detected or changes are captured. We can send off text messages. We can control that. And I'll show you all of these features as we go forward. But I mentioned a term called control boundaries at the very beginning. And what those really represent is how we want to organize different services and capabilities within the application. So if we look at simply a dataset list first, what we're looking at is a list of datasets that I want to put services around. I want to put protections around. I want some kind of functions automatically performed for me. Those best practice functions that I mentioned. Automatically make a backup, automatically send people off, test these things for me. All of those kind of functions can be automated through the control editor. We enable those and administer those through a panel like this. It's very easily done. But what we're looking at is a list of data sets in groups that we want to apply this same set of logic to and protections against. And these are things like setting up passwords, additional passwords, sending off email notifications, capturing documentation when a change is made. So let me just show you what I'm talking about here, because it's much easier to show than it is to try to explain. So I'm going to simply go into Edit here at 3.4. I'm going to go into a data set that I have identified to the control editor that I would like it to protect and provide those services for. Some data sets are automatically picked up by the control editor, but they can be eliminated. These would be your parm libs or proc libs and those kind of critical files. But you can also organize your own set of categories and set your own services and policy rules for each one of those categories. So in this case, I'm going to pick on this data set called parmx, and I want to edit it. Now, once we've identified a data set to the control editor, either by discovery or by definition, the very first thing it will do is go off and create out a backup of that particular data set if it's a PDS, PDSC, or sequential data set. If it's a Unix file, the same thing, and it's going to make a copy of that. For load libraries, we do things a little bit differently, but we still track and monitor those environments for change. So what we do is we make a backup of that as the first generation. Then as we go into edit and pick a particular member, what's going to happen is it's going to compare the content of that member against the backup that's in the journal, the most recent backup, and it's going to compare those two. If they match, it's going to let me proceed uninterrupted. If they do not match, it will tell me and then make a new backup for me. So even before I begin to make a modification or a change or some improvement to this particular member that I'm selecting or data set or file that I'm selecting, it's going to tell me that I've got a good backup. Now at this point, it's kind of a control point when you're entering in edit. So when I select this member for edit, there's a couple things that happen. First, that compare is done. But secondly, I reach a compare point where optionally I can establish another level of control, access control against this data set. I can say that this data set is so important to my overall integrity that I want only those people who know the password to get in there. So even though RACF, ACF2, or Top Secret has granted me permission, I still can enforce that or extend that by applying a password here. What this really means is that the owners of the data, the people that are responsible for this particular file or data set, can put on their own access right rules beyond what is done by the security system. This gives you a great deal more control over these most critical files. And let me go ahead and do this and put the password in. And once I do, then I'm allowed into edit. And that compare had been done, and it was said, hey, the member matches the last backup. You're golden. Go ahead and do whatever you need to do. So now at this point, I can go and make my change. I can do whatever I want for this particular member, as long as, again, the RACF, ACF2, and Top Secret validate my rights. So you're always under the control of those external security managers, but we can extend that, as you just saw, with the password. So if I have update authority, I can go in and make change to this. And now I hit a second control point, and this is optional, again, by different categories. So my Parm Lib, I want this feature. My JCL Lib, I don't. Okay, or I want a different form, or I want a different pattern of usability. And this is an ISPF panel. We supply many of them as examples, so you can build your own. What that means is you can test for things. You can make sure that the fields are populated correctly, if they're supposed to be numeric or alpha, or how many characters you write in the documentation area about how to back it off or how to change it. Whatever you want to do, this is your form. There can be a help panel behind it as well. And you can, F1 will bring that up and they can read the help if they're confused by it. But once the panel is filled out properly and you save that change, there's, again, some actions being taken. Some of those best practices that I talked about are being accomplished automatically for you. First thing we're going to do is make a new backup of that member that was just modified and store that away into the journaling system. Secondly, optionally, you can say, I want an email notification about this event sent to this list, whoever this list might be. And again, this is by category. So if it's by Parm Lib, I want it to go to one set of people. If it's a VTAM member or out of VTAM library, I want it to go to a different set of people. If it's my TCP/IP DEX, I want it to go to a third set of people. However you want to manage that, it gives you that ability. Now, I started by talking about extending the security controls. There's even more in here. So if I say I want to be able now, within the same data set, to come in and edit this member, once again, I'll be prompted for the password to get into the data set. But I can also assign member level rights within a data set. So these rights are things from edit to browse to copy, rename, delete, whatever I want to do, and either allow those to be done or not by a particular user or group of users. So I can do include or exclude logic on this so that only one person can get in and nobody else, or this person cannot and everybody else can. So you can build this either way, but the idea is, again, that the owner of the data, the owner of the information, can set their own policies and rules in place and extend what's available through the external security managers and give you that ability. Now we do this for data sets, again, all of them that I mentioned before, the different types. We can also do this for Unix files. So if we come down and we do the same kind of process and we want to look at editing a particular Unix file, we can come in and do that as well. So let's just come in and we'll edit this guy. And once again, I can put security on this. So now think of it in terms of your TCP/IP definitions, particularly for the policy agent with its Unix files. You can put an extra layer of control over that, so only the right people are coming in to either view or update or do whatever they want to do within these particular data sets. And it gives you the ability to control this as one of those more critical data sets and files. And then when you come in and you make your change here, it's going to process the same way as before, which is put up a descriptor panel perhaps if you've designed and asked for it, send off email notifications again if you've designed and asked for it. All of this is under your user control for these things. Now I want to show you one more thing here about the control editor and its ability to establish controls by coming back over here and now looking at the different types of boundaries. So we're looking at data sets. Load libraries are kind of interesting in that there are some controls that probably more apply to the load libraries than anything else. In the data sets, we can look obviously at Parm libs and JCL libs. We can look at edits and submits and renames and deletes and adds and all those other kind of services. But in the case of load libraries, we can do all the same things and set up all the different options as well. But one of the things I want to point out that's more critical for load libraries is that we can turn on some additional features. And these are available actually for all of the targets, but this gives us a little bit more value to the load libraries. There's a process we put in called auto detect, which basically says, all right, you're out there and you're going to track every time someone goes into a data set or goes into one of these libraries and makes a change, we're going to see it, we're going to record it, we're going to send our emails, we're going to write records into the journaling system, all that's being done. But what if they come in through some other way, through a batch job? Well, actually we have protection for batch jobs as well, but let's say they haven't enabled that protection. So they're making a change in a way that's not through TSO ISPF or through an expected batch process. In order to protect that, ultimately, we have a background task that runs and goes off and says, is everything current? Do I know about the current state of everything? And if it does, great. If not, it will create a new backup if necessary and send off email notifications when they occur. Those email notifications can be turned on and off, again, based on the different categories of events and data sets and files. So we can turn this off here and say, well, look, I don't want auto detect to run against this. This is not really that critical. If it changes, make a backup, but I don't need you checking it, every once in a while to see if we're current. But what's nice about this is we also can turn off some abilities against these data sets. And again, this is more important for load libraries, in that we can actually prevent people from deleting, renaming, uncataloguing, or cataloging data sets or files or load libraries in this case. So it really gives you the ability to not only control access by the methods I showed you before, but actually restrict who can do things with the entire load library. And we can actually turn this on. And the way I have it set up right now is I can override that and say, well, there's one user that can come in that does not apply to, and this is the user that I've defined here. So that's the idea of this, is to be able to, again, extend the controls to the people that own these files and data sets so that they're the ones making the ultimate decision about who can get in, who can make changes, who can make improvements, who can manipulate these files and do things with them. So that's what this is all about, is showing me what's going on. Now, the last thing I mentioned earlier about dynamic changes, and one of the things I want to point out to you is that we also have the ability, as one of the boundary classes, is capturing commands. So if a command is entered and I want to know about it, again, I can trigger email. I can trigger a descriptor panel that says, tell me why you're issuing this command. I can store that command away into the journaling file as well. I think I have a record out here somewhere. Of a command being entered. Thought it went. Well, here it is. So this is the case where I've entered a set command earlier today, and it captured that, stored it away into the journaling file. Again, that can trigger an email, that can trigger notification, but I have an audit record of that created as well. So even if the changes are being made dynamically, I can still see them, still know that they're going on. So I can see the edit change, I can see the batch job change, I can see the command change. I have the ability to resolve all of that to make sure that they're all going to work properly, that dynamic change was hardened, that the member that was updated will execute properly the next time I need it, and that it incorporates correctly within all the capabilities and facilities that I need in order to initialize that. There's a great deal more information available about these applications. The control editor and image focus were the two major ones that I touched on. But again, I don't have time to go through the full story. We do, as I said before, have services available on our website, in our YouTube channel. But the idea of this is to help you establish these control boundaries, protect them, extend the controls over protecting them that you have in RAC FACF2, monitor them, understand what's happening with them, because these are the most critical data sets that you have in your environment. You can use our structure to analyze and administer this, or the new structure that I mentioned before that's being introduced is my applications. In this case, my TCE is the example I'm using because it gives us the best extraction technique out of the journals. But certainly all of my applications are critical. Now, in summary, here's my my email address. Feel free to send me an email. You can go out to our website, newera.com, jump on our YouTube channel, look at other videos. If you have a desire to get into more detail about anything I touched on today, We can certainly arrange a separate webcast for you and your team, or if you go to the YouTube videos, if you don't find what you want there, let us know and we'll be able to dig down more deeply for you. But I appreciate all of you taking the time. And Jerry, I'll turn it back over to you now to answer any questions you may have. Anybody out there?